With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Heard Tell Show. Okay, we're not the only ones having crazy elections with weird outcomes here in America. Our Irish friends just did this as well. They had some elections, historic elections. So we're going to do what we always do. We're going to go to Ireland and talk about it. Our buddy Conor Duffy returns to Heard Tell. Been a minute since we've had him on. Thrilled to get to talk to him. And we have to be very reverential now because since the last time we talked to him, he is now or within a few weeks of becoming Dr. Conor Duffy. How are you, you august and notable member of our society, sir?
I'm not doing too bad, Andrew. Not doing too bad. I suppose I should clarify for your audience as well, though, of course, that I am the type of doctor that, you know, if someone asks on a plane, is there a doctor on board? I very much need to stay in my seat, though. You know, I'm not too good in one of those emergencies.
Yeah, he has a doctorate in one of those sciences that I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce out loud here, but he is a great guy. He's been on the program before. Happy to have you back, my friend. Okay, I'm 40. I'll be 42 years old here in 2 weeks. Don't tell anybody. Explain to 80s kid me how the political arm of the IRA is now the predominant political force in Ireland, because that's what just happened. Now, to people our age, this is almost unfathomable. To younger people, it seemed like it was an inevitability. That's a lot of history in a short period of time. The old quote comes to mind, it happened gradually, then suddenly. Is that kind of what we're dealing with here?
Yeah, exactly. So there's two elections we do need to cover here to fully get across what's just happened. The first one happened a few years ago, and that's when at the start of 2020, just before COVID, Ireland here in the south, or the 26 counties of Ireland, we had an election where Sinn Féin, the political wing of the IRA, as you would have known them during the Troubles, they won the most votes because of some bad strategy and the peculiarities of the Irish electoral system. They actually didn't end up with the most seats, but they received more votes than anyone else. Then recently, the election that happened a few days ago that has everyone talking is that was up in Northern Ireland, which is the 6 counties of Ulster that were partitioned 101 years ago. And there was an election and Sinn Féin again won the most votes, but now they also have the most seats in the Northern Ireland Assembly, which is the devolved government of Northern Ireland, similar to how Scotland and Wales have their own individual governments as well as Westminster in the UK. That's what the Northern Ireland Assembly is in Northern Ireland. And as of this election, Sinn Féin is now the largest party, and that is something that has never happened before. A party that was in favour of uniting the 6 counties of Northern Ireland with the 26 counties of Ireland has never had a majority, or has never been the largest party in the Northern Ireland Assembly before. So that is absolutely massive. That is really groundbreaking, because Northern Ireland as a state was more or less designed that this would never happen. And here we have it 101 years later, as I say, and it has now happened. And it is now the political wing of the IRA who have actually managed to pull that off and be the largest party and wanting to unite Ireland. But this has been a long time in the coming. Since the Good Friday Agreement, Sinn Féin have been really steadily building a lot of support, and there's a lot of different reasons for that happening. As you say, for people who are a little bit older, it's maybe a big shock, people who remember the Troubles, but you have to remember that the Troubles ended over 20 years ago now. There's a lot of people voting who weren't even alive when it happened. And so the issues that have dominated these elections have naturally changed. For a lot of these people, it's like, well, it's the here and now that they're talking about and they're caring about, not the Troubles, which have been over, as I say, even before they were born. So that is a large part of it. It's a generation turning over to a large extent. There's a big part of what's happened here.
So let's talk about what those issues actually are. Sinn Féin, underneath the obviously the nationalism and the IRA connections, it started as a workers' party. What's the issues that have really brought them to the fore? Because especially the last 15, 20 years, the Democratic Unionist Party, the DUP, that was the ruling party. Did they do stuff wrong? Did Sinn Féin do something right? What's the dynamic there that they have overtaken the DUP and taken power here?
It's definitely both. As is often the case in these situations. The DUP had a turnover of leadership not too long ago. Their previous leader, Arlene Foster, was previously involved in a big scandal called the Cash to Ash scandal, which was basically, to really sum it up quickly, they threw a really bad bit of legislation that resulted in people being paid to just burn wood in their houses. And it led to a lot of people, led to an awful lot of money being wasted, certainly not what the law was intended to do, became a big problem. And that was quite a while ago now. That was quite a few years ago, but her leadership was sort of in a bit of a problem for a little while there. Then Brexit happened. And a lot of sides in Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK kind of started falling down on Brexit lines. The DUP had a bit more influence because of the way an election went in Westminster, that they were actually kind of the kingmakers of coalitions. So the Tories needed their support to stay in. So that gave the DUP a bit of a shot in the arm in a time where things weren't so good. But then after Brexit happened, you remember that Northern Ireland actually voted to stay in the EU, even though the majority of the DUP were opposed to staying in the EU. So there was that disconnect. So Sinn Féin has gotten a lot of support that way, because not only has leaving the EU been unpopular in Northern Ireland, the DUP have also taken a bit of an extreme stance on it, where they are opposed to the current compromise that has managed to have Britain leaving the EU while Northern Ireland and the UK kind of retaining this sort of special arrangement that stops, borders being put up on the island or anything like that. The DUP essentially wants to scrap all that. A lot of people are not happy with that, both the nationalist side, but also the unionist side, because they're concerned about, what would the effects on the Northern Irish economy be if there was suddenly a lot more trade restrictions between Ireland and Northern Ireland. So the DUP have made a lot of mistakes in that sense. As I say, they also had a turnover of leadership, and Arlene Foster was, it's a funny thing to say about her, but she genuinely was from the more moderate wing of the DUP. This is a party where a lot of people kind of think the dinosaurs never existed. It's that sort of a group of guys. Have a lot of they have a lot of views on a lot of issues that are quite out of touch with a lot of people. So the current leader, has kind of made some mistakes, alienated some people in that way. But then on the Sinn Féin side of things, the way it's gone in Northern Ireland has been slightly different, because Sinn Féin has been involved in the government of Northern Ireland for the last few years. So it's not as radical a change there. But yeah, one of the big issues was Brexit. But then, there's also things like, kind of cost of living crises, housing costs, things like that, all that sort of bread and butter stuff, or kitchen table issues. That's a very big part of it too. That's more true in the 26 counties of the Republic of Ireland. That's a big part of how Sinn Féin has done well there. But like in Northern Ireland, that is absolutely playing into it as well. And Sinn Féin are seen as being very much opposed to the government of the UK, the Conservative Party, which has been in power for quite some time. So, there's sort of a bit of an opposition vote that's happening there as well.
Yeah, talking to our buddy Conor Duffy over in Ireland. We talk about changes in leadership. We got to talk about the generational change. And really, I don't know that you could overstate the passing of the torch here. The current leader of Sinn Féin, Mary Lou McDonald, she replaced Gerry Adams. And Gerry Adams is very familiar to the American audience. He was the guy in the suit with the beard who did a lot of fundraising in the 80s and 90s. Part of that was because he was banned from being on any media in the UK. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But Gerry Adams was very involved. There's been court cases, there's been accusations, there's been criminal complaints. He was very much in the IRA mold of the Sinn Féin as the political arm of the IRA. Mary Lou McDonald, the last 2018, is it too much to say kind of the clean political new version of Sinn Féin you were talking about? This really does seem like that's a line of demarcation of when this really changed, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is, because it wasn't just Gerry Adams. There was also Martin McGuinness was the leader of Sinn Féin up in Northern Ireland, and he is no longer in charge now. He has actually died. But before he passed, there was also a change to Michelle O'Neill, who is the current leader of Sinn Féin up in Northern Ireland. Again, someone who was not involved in the Troubles in any way. So, I don't know if that's true, but I'm sure that's certainly what's going out at the moment anyway. So Mary McDonald, Michelle O'Neill, certainly not, they're not faces from the Troubles, not involved, as I said. There was some other, say, politicians who were in Sinn Féin who have also since retired, who were from the Troubles generation. All of the faces from Sinn Féin that you see in the news here in Ireland these days, they're all fresh faces. They're people who were not involved in the IRA, who were not involved in the period of time when the Troubles were going on in Northern Ireland. And they are really trying to present themselves as, this is a party that is, materially different from the one that was the political wing of the IRA back in the 80s. They are still as committed to a united Ireland as they have ever been, but they have shifted, and it is, the IRA used to describe their tactics as an Armalite in one hand and the ballot box in the other. The version of Sinn Féin we have now is committed to the ballot box for how it is going to achieve things. And this has been a long process of them trying to convince more and more people that they have in fact made this change. And a big part of how a lot of people are buying that is, as you say, passing of the torch. Gerry Adams is gone, Martin McGuinness is gone. The people who are there in charge now, they're talking about other issues. They're not talking about, trying to violently end the occupation of Northern Ireland. They're talking about, issues of housing and healthcare and, coming to a united Ireland by a vote rather than some sort of military victory over the British. So that sort of shift has been a very big part of how Sinn Féin have become much more acceptable to a lot more people on both sides of the border here in Ireland.
Yeah, and just looking at their political platform, especially the most recent one that they did, it's a lot of boilerplate stuff, abolishing the VAT and fuel and energy goods, something on everybody's mind with the economy. Social and affordable home schemes that they're putting together. I'm using schemes there, by the way, in the version they use over yonder, where it's not a bad thing. That's just what they call these things. Talking about, should they have an all Ireland health service based off the NHS model? This is just kind of boilerplate populist politics kind of stuff, for lack of a better term. This seems like it would get you a lot farther at the ballot box. And I think there's evidence now that says whatever they're doing, it's working.
No, I agree completely, because that's why a lot of people are voting for them these days. They're voting for them because they feel, well, Sinn Féin represents my views on these array of issues more than the other parties do, or especially down here in the Republic of Ireland in the 26 counties. It's sort of like, these other parties have been in charge for a very long time. There are problems with housing is a big one here in Ireland, also problems with the health system and cost of living and stuff like that. And some people are like, well, maybe it's time for a change of guard, and Sinn Féin are the largest party that would potentially represent that change. Something to maybe appreciate here too is that part of why Sinn Féin became the largest party in Northern Ireland is also that there was a surge in support for this non-aligned party, the Alliance Party. And the Alliance Party don't consider themselves nationalists or unionists. They're sort of a kind of middle ground liberal party, and a lot of support has gone to them. They actually gained more votes than anyone else this election. So Sinn Féin becoming the largest party is also because a lot of people who maybe would have voted unionist before are now voting for this party that wants to talk about other things. So they're kind of benefiting from that change in the political landscape in two ways, because their opponents are losing votes to someone who wants to talk all about these sort of bread and butter stuff, but also they are gaining votes themselves personally because they emphasize that more themselves these days as well.
Yeah, very interesting sea change going on. Our friend Conor Duffy over in Ireland, we're going to continue to talk to him right after the break. We're going to get a little bit more into Ireland. Northern Ireland is becoming a mess. We need to talk about it. It came up in the Queen's speech in Parliament down south. We'll talk about Northern Ireland, the future of Ireland. Is reunification now something more on the horizon? It's been talked about for 100-some years. Are they actually getting close to it? We'll talk about it with Conor Duffy when we return on Heard Tell right after this. Welcome back to Heard Tell. We're talking Ireland with somebody that's actually in Ireland, who happens to be Irish, not American Irish, where everybody claims to be so they can drink on St. Patrick's Day. He's actually Irish. Conor Duffy. You'll believe me as soon as he starts talking. All right. It came up in all the policy around the Queen's speech in Parliament, which was given by Prince Charles. Unfortunately, obviously, the Queen is not in great health. There is a lot of talk that Northern Ireland has just basically, for lack of a better word, been neglected and forgotten for the last couple of months. I think that's a fair criticism of, frankly, both the Conservatives and the Labour Party hasn't really covered themselves in glory either. I know there's a lot going on in the UK, Brexit, COVID, all this stuff. Northern Ireland is getting very messy and very loud, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And something that we need to say here as well is that Northern Ireland, for a lot of the time of the last few years, there actually hasn't even been a functioning assembly there. So there has been this impasse where the parties couldn't agree to work together. And so they also lacked a devolved government. So that is a large part of the frustration that's happening there too, is you've got this devolved power that isn't actually in place, isn't actually being used. To say that Northern Ireland has been neglected for the last few months is an understatement of the century. I would say Northern Ireland has been neglected for a very, very long time. It has generally been something that I would say the UK political system, the political establishment in the UK have been happy to just sort of ignore since the Good Friday Agreement to a very large extent. And, you know, it was kind of when Brexit first happened, I would say that you had a lot of politicians in the UK, once this Northern Irish border became a problem, they were kind of just learning about what Northern Ireland was like for the first time. You know, it was a place that had sort of been left to neglect, as you say, for quite a long time. And so there are problems there. And that is again why people are going to start turning to parties that, you know, kind of are against the whole, who are against the prevailing people in power, against the system in general, and, you know, they want to have a change. And so, yeah, another factor in Sinn Féin's rise is that right there.
The DUP, which we already talked about, has been the dominant party. Still probably a little bit more powerful in Northern Ireland than larger Ireland now with the Sinn Féin stuff. They have vowed to block the formation of Northern Ireland's power sharing executive. Since this is kind of unique to Northern Ireland because of all the dynamics we talked to, for an American audience that isn't used to things like that, what does that actually mean? And how are they holding this up? And what's the effect of that? Because we already said we've had gridlock here for the last couple of months badly, but really for the last few years in various itinerations. What does stopping the power sharing executive mean?
Yeah, so the power sharing is the system of government that has been in place in Northern Ireland since the Good Friday Agreement. And what it essentially means is that you can't form a government in Ireland you can in Ireland. You cannot form a government in Northern Ireland just with a majority of seats. That isn't how it works. You need to have parties that represent both the unionist side and the nationalist side of the political divide in Northern Ireland. So every party in Northern Ireland actually has to register itself as representing nationalists, as representing unionists, or as non-aligned. And so I mentioned the Alliance earlier. They're a good example of a party that calls themselves non-aligned or neither. So in order to have power sharing, you need to have representation. Your majority that you form the government with has to have representation from both the nationalist and the loyalist communities. And there's a whole bunch of issues in Northern Ireland where they can trigger what's called a petition of concern. And essentially what that means is that in order for some piece of legislation to get through, you know, one of the parties says this is of special interest to our community, you need to actually get majorities from both the nationalists and the loyalists in the assembly before that can go. So there's these checks that are in place that are essentially to prevent what happened for the majority of Northern Irish history, which was that nationalists were systematically excluded from power, and the loyalist majority, or that unionist majority, was able to just sort of impose things upon them without them having, you know, really any kind of democratic recourse. So the power sharing as well as voting reform was put in to basically ensure that that couldn't happen, that everything, all the major decisions had to have input from both the nationalists and the unionists. Of course, what this means is that the largest party of the nationalist or the unionist side has an awful lot of power to prevent a government from being formed. So there isn't really a way forward in Northern Ireland without having the DUP agree that they want to form a power sharing executive. But for them to form a power sharing executive now, it would mean accepting the leader of Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland, Michelle O'Neill, as the First Minister, it is officially a shared post. There is the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister, but in practice, the biggest party gets the First Minister. That would be a hugely symbolic win for Sinn Féin. So the DUP, who have already not been keen on power sharing in recent years anyway, are, threatening that, they don't want any involvement with this. The leader of the DUP may not even take his seat in the Northern Ireland Assembly, which is a whole other problem because he also has a seat in Westminster right now. So one of these little peculiarities of the system that emerge when you've got a devolved administration. And yeah, the consequence of that would be, again, just no executive in Northern Ireland, essentially no devolved government making decisions on the issues that people are caring about. And what happens from then is either the UK takes direct control of what's happening in Northern Ireland or another round of elections. And, I don't, who knows what would happen there, but I doubt we would see wildly different things, because this seems to be what people are expressing, that they're happy with the people who are voting Sinn Féin are happy with Sinn Féin. People who were previously voting for the unionist parties are turning away from them. So that's sort of the political landscape right now. And without another power sharing executive, it's very likely that could only accelerate.
Yeah, talking to our friend Conor Duffy over in Ireland. This quote grabbed my attention. I was reading through some of the Irish media. Fintan O'Toole wrote it this way. He said, "The old Northern Ireland is dead, but the new one cannot be born." Do you think that's, you can't get anything into one little soundbite, but that sure seems like it encapsulates a lot of this, doesn't it?
That's pretty good, yeah, because the old Northern Ireland, as I said, was a state, less a sort of region of the UK that was more or less designed so that nationalists would never be in a majority, that they would never be deciding what happens in Northern Ireland. That clearly is just completely not true anymore. It was even actually acknowledged in the BBC. This was something that got spread around on Twitter and such quite a lot, that a presenter for the BBC just casually threw that line out there when he was explaining the results, that, Northern Ireland as a state was designed so that what's happening now would never happen. So I don't think there's any, I don't think there's a clear indication that is the old Northern Ireland, is no longer the Northern Ireland that exists now. But as for whether the new Northern Ireland can come about, yeah, you've got this gridlock between the parties. There is potentially not going to be a new administration. Because power sharing is the way Northern Ireland is run anyway, even if an executive was formed, it's actually unlikely that Sinn Féin's new position would lead to radically different sort of governance happening, since, as I say, they were previously the junior partner in power sharing before. This would be them shifting to senior partner. So, you wouldn't expect radically different things to happen, but kind of, as I say, symbolically, this is a huge thing. And it definitely does put the question of a united Ireland far more on the political agenda than it has been for a very long time.
One of those, you mentioned Westminster and the peculiarities and how there's kind of this dual identity between Northern Ireland and Westminster, which is the UK Parliament, the House of Commons. One of those longstanding peculiarities is Sinn Féin practice abstentia, where they would be elected to Parliament but would not serve. They would hold the title, they would hold all the rights, but they wouldn't actually show up in Parliament. Is that kind of the next step in normalization of Sinn Féin? Do you think that policy goes away and they see an opportunity here and start making their presence known?
I don't think they'll ever do that.
Really? You think they're going to hold on to that to the end?
Sinn Féin will never take their seats in Westminster. I would be shocked if they did. That is something they care very, very much about. And it's something that people criticized an awful lot in recent years, actually, because people said, you guys have seats that you could take in Westminster that you could potentially use to influence how Brexit is going. Brexit was something that most people in Northern Ireland voted against, yet most people in the UK as a whole voted for. So it was kind of, if there was ever an issue that would get Sinn Féin to take their seats in Westminster, that was it, and they didn't. And every time they've been asked, they just don't even like hearing the question. They're like, "We're perfectly clear. We're never going to take the seats in Westminster."
So that's the one red line here that's never going to get crossed.
Yeah, a red line I don't think would ever get crossed.
All right, you mentioned it. This is the big question of all this. I think some folks are probably getting a little ahead of themselves here with this. It's still one election. We still got maybe a trend, but you got to have more than one to have a trend. Are we closer to reunification now than we were 10, 15 years ago?
Than we were 10, 15 years ago, I would certainly say we are. As for whether it's going to happen tomorrow or next year, I would say no, because there's a lot of things you need to keep in mind before we start thinking that this is about to happen. First of all, the unionists as a whole still got more votes than nationalists in this election. Now it was 0.1% of a difference, I think, when you totted it all up. It wasn't a big margin, but it was there. It was still, as a whole, when you added all the unionist parties together, there was more votes for them. So unionists aren't a minority in Northern Ireland yet. They're probably not going to be a minority in Northern Ireland, in a very short space of time. A lot of people who are in the middle there, the people who are, say, voting for the likes of the Alliance Party, they are the ones who I suppose would need to be persuaded one way or another whether a united Ireland was better for them or whether staying in the United Kingdom was better for them. That kind of conversation trying to appeal towards those sort of voters hasn't really been happening yet. But what I think this will really do is, this is an issue, as I've said, in Ireland, especially in the 26 counties in the south, has largely been sort of ignored. It's always been like, oh, that's a generation away. We don't need to worry about that now. I think the fact that Sinn Féin is now the party that is largest in Northern Ireland is probably going to be the party that's largest after the next elections here in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland. That means we just have to start talking about it. That's what these people primarily believe in. It is the main reason the party exists. So we're going to have to start having discussions about what would a united Ireland actually look like. And once those discussions start, then you're going to start getting input from people who are, sort of maybe middle of the road up in Northern Ireland, don't really know which side they would vote for if a poll came. We're going to have to start talking to these people, and they'll, say, well, what are your concerns? And, what is stopping you from voting one way or the other, or what is having you leaning one way or the other? And so the actual process that would be required before we get to a united Ireland, that is, I think, the big thing that has to be acknowledged about this election. That process is probably going to get going now, where had the election gone another way, maybe it wouldn't have.
Yeah, talking to Conor Duffy. I'm an outside observer, you tell me, but I do quite a bit of politics, and politics are pretty universal in how they work. It would seem to me that if your goal was a united Ireland, I think UK incompetence and the governance and the dysfunction that we're seeing in Northern Ireland, just on a people level, that probably will drive that conversation a whole lot more than the 100+ years of nationalism on it. Because people, it's one thing to have the slogans, it's one thing to have the pride in your country and all that. It's another thing when it's affecting your meals. It's another thing when it's affecting your jobs. And healthcare is becoming a big issue in Northern Ireland. The trade tariffs and these sorts of things, we know the backstop thing that just beat everybody over the head. That seems to me like if you're going to drive a massive change like reunification, that's the sort of thing that would actually drive it a lot faster than what things like what Sinn Féin's been doing for 100 years.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely going to be part of it. It's going to be part of what persuades people who are sort of not committed one way or the other. That's going to be what persuades them in the day. And I think it's a question of when, not if, by the way, now, but when a border poll happens that tries to decide what happens with Northern Ireland and whether there will be unification with the Republic of Ireland, I mean, those sorts of questions are going to be weighing very heavily on those people's minds. It's going to be like, well, which choice would be, better for me and my family, just in terms of, our well-being, in terms of, the type of society we want to live in terms of, sort of the economy, is always something that's on people's minds. A lot of parties don't like that it is, but that's always what people care most about. Obviously, we also now have another divide where Ireland is in the EU and the UK isn't. So that is going to become part of the question as well. It's like, well, do you want to be back in Europe? Well, that's one way to do it. So, is there some people who will value being in the EU more than being in the United Kingdom? That's going to be part of the conversation as well.
Yeah, Conor Duffy, our good friend. That's Dr. Conor Duffy to you after June 1, when they'll put fancy things around his neck and say solemn words upon him. I don't know if they lay hands over there or whatever. Do they do swords over there? I don't know.
Swords? No. That was it's a monarch thing. We're a republic these days.
Oh, excuse me, my bad. Yeah, there'll be pomp and circumstances, and I'm assuming some liquor will be involved at some point. My friend, until we see and talk to you again on Heard Tell, let folks know where they can follow you and what you have going on.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at ConorDuffy7. That's on Twitter, one N in Connor. That's usually where I post all of my thoughts on politics and whatnot. Same on Instagram, but I don't really do much of that sort of thing there. So, if you want to hear more thoughts on Northern Ireland, that's where you'll find.
With haircut like that, you've got going, my friend. You need to get on Instagram. You'll be big, huge, huge. Conor Duffy, our good friend in Ireland. Always appreciate catching up. We'll do it again sooner than the gap of time since the last time we saw you. We talked about it before. We need to talk about freedom of speech in the UK and Ireland and Scotland. A lot going on there. Conor Duffy, appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you for having me, Andrew. Glad to be here.
Sir. Thank you for explaining this stuff. You do a good job of it, my friend. Talk soon.
Talk soon.